Hi all. In this mini lecture, continuing our discussion of European establishment of colonies and conquests outside of Europe, we discuss the rise of the encomienda system in the New World. Although missionaries had been present in the Caribbean from the 1490s, early Spanish colonization of the vast island region was mostly a mad dash for gold and slaves. Early Spanish settlers had little interest in working the land for themselves. Instead, they preferred to live off the rents and labor provided by Native American slaves and tribute payers. Soon, news of massive abuse and alarming death rates among the Taino and captive Caribe reached Spain, and Queen Isabella was prompted to demand an end to Amerindian slavery. After 1503, only violent rebels and alleged cannibals were to be enslaved. But would the Taino then be free in exchange for accepting Catholicism and Spanish protection against the Caribe? No, primarily because their labor was thought to be necessary for mining gold. European monarchs desperately needed and wanted this precious mineral. Compromise between the Taino desire to be free and European need for gold resulted in the encomienda system. In the encomienda system, native villages, headed by chieftains, were entrusted to leading Spanish citizens in a manner resembling medieval European feudalism. Village farming folk offered their labor and their surplus produce to a Spanish overlord. In exchange, they received military protection, particularly from the Caribe. Chiefs of native villages then served as middlemen. They were exempt from tribute and manual labor exactions. The Spanish who received these fiefdoms were called encomenderos. They were self-styled men-at-arms, and from their ranks would come the conquerors of mainland America. The Native Americans who were deemed good and faithful subjects of Crown and Church paid their tributes to the encomendero, or trustee as he was called. This payment was made in farm products, textiles, and other local goods twice each year. Adult men also rendered labor to the encomendero from time to time. They helped to clear farmland, round up livestock, and construct buildings as needed. The encomendero himself was to protect these native tributaries on his estate from outside attack. He was also to ensure that they converted to Christianity. In theory, the encomienda system looked good on paper and resembled a reciprocal agreement. But in reality, it looked a lot like slavery to the rare Spanish critics who dared to denounce it. It looked even more like slavery to the many thousands of native peoples who suffered under its structures. One of the leading voices against the encomienda system and Spanish domination in the New World was Bartolomé de las Casas, some of whose readings you examined this week. Las Casas held that God would wage vengeful punishments against the Christians whose actions in the so-called Indies had so heinously and violently disrupted native societies. Las Casas was a Hispaniola or Haitian encomendero's son who had become a Dominican priest. He emerged as a leading defender of Native American rights in the early modern era. Some historians see him as representing the more humanitarian side of the Spanish character in an otherwise violently acquisitive period related to Columbus and his successors. Las Casas' efforts would help to suppress the indigenous slave trade and sharply restricted the encomienda system by the early 1540s. This was accomplished through several means. First, constantly pleading his case at the Spanish court before the king and the queen. Remember what I said previously about Isabella hearing the news of these mistreatments. Second, there were widely publicized university debates on the subject. And third, All of these were broadly disseminated in written tracts, like the one you read for class. For the Tainos who had first met Columbus, though, this intervention came way too late. By 1510, there were only a few hundred encomienda subjects of Taino extraction. Just a decade before, there had been hundreds of thousands. By any measure, then, Columbus's arrival and the era of Spanish domination in the Caribbean was, at least for the Native Americans, a disaster.